Hey guys, welcome back to First and 10 over here on Clueless Gamers. I am your host, Pete, joined in a couple seconds here, as always, by my co-host, Brian. Welcome to the show. If you've not been by the channel before and never seen the podcast, we talk pretty much all NFL news, things going on, previewing games. We give some picks. We're in the middle of the playoffs right now, and we're going to be doing our preview of the conference championships that are going to be up in a few days on this coming Sunday. And then if you stick around, we're going to talk about some head coaching and GM kind of openings, firings that we missed when in the last couple weeks when we did not do a show. And there's been a couple hires as of today, as of Thursday, here on January 27th that have taken place. So with all that being said, Brian, welcome you in. How you doing tonight? And what are you most looking forward to talking about?
Yeah, hey Pete, doing well. Looking forward to this weekend. Obviously, conference championships always a lot of fun. Of course, our show on Sunday. I don't know if we're ever going to top that one,
I don't
coming
think
off
so.
that Bulls Chiefs game and all the craziness that happened last week, and it made for such a great show with so many things to talk about. But I think the two games this weekend shape up to be pretty good. I like the matchups going in, and I think there's certainly a lot to break down.
There's definitely a lot to break down, and you're going to get our picks by the end of our breakdowns for the preview of the conference championships. We got to lock them in. We've been doing it all season, and we'll see where we're going up. And then when we get ready for the Super Bowl, whoever that may be, I have to still tally up the yearly picks, see what kind of percentages we did compared to last year, and see if we improved, if we were about the same. Maybe we dropped off a little bit. Brian, with that being said, let's kick it off with in order here. 3 o'clock CBS on Sunday Eastern Standard Time. You got the Cincinnati Bengals, the 4 seed. Some would say the Cinderella team of this NFL playoff season here in the 2021 season. They're going to go and play Kansas City Chiefs, the number 2 seed, believe it or not. But I would say overwhelmingly we're probably the favorites, at least on the AFC side, coming into the playoffs. You and I have had questions about this team all year, but you know what? These 2 playoff games, particularly last week, they've put a lot of those questions to bed, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And so with Kansas City welcoming this team in, Bry, how are you seeing this matchup shape out before even you give your pick? What are you most looking forward to? What matchups are you looking forward to, either player or different sides of the ball, and how do you see this game progressing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things to look at. I mean, first, from the Cincinnati perspective, this is a team that's not going to be phased by going into the raucous environment at Arrowhead Stadium
No.
because of the confidence that they have. I mean, we talked about it on the last show, but it starts with the quarterback and Joe Burrow, who just carries himself a certain way, and it's a way where he feels very highly about himself and his team's chances. And they're on quite a nice little run here. It's been a long time for the Cincinnati team that has done any kind of damage in the playoffs, but finally got off the schneid with the impressive performance against the Raiders, and then going to Tennessee and knocking off the number 1 seed in the AFC. Burrow, I like the way he's played. He's played with confidence. We took the last show too, all the weapons that he has at his disposal. So I think that's one thing that you look at to start is, of course, you look at Kansas City and the numerous weapons they have, and even it goes beyond Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill because Mahomes has gotten other guys involved. But this Cincinnati team, they might not have quite the same firepower that the Chiefs have, but I think they have enough where they at least can match up with the likes of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, who's become a really nice weapon as the number 2 receiver. Haven't really gotten the running game going. I think that's something they'll look to do more of in this game. It's really been a lot on Joe Burrow so far, but Mixon, we know, is a top caliber running back. I think Cincinnati's going to be able to put up points. The Chiefs defense, remember, it started off so poorly this year. Then they had a stretch where they played great. Then they kind of showed some leaks again at the end of the season. So it's been kind of up and down. Not really know exactly what you're going to get from them. I think Cincinnati will be able to score points in this game. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. And I'll save my pick for a little later and let you give your analysis.
Yeah, this one's going to be fun. I think initially, believe it or not, I think a lot of people could look at this game and go, this could be a very lopsided game, right? KC can run away with this. But as we've seen throughout the 2 games that the Bengals have played, those games have been tight, but they have played really, really well. And you know what? I think a lot of the attention for this Bengals team goes on the offensive side of the ball, and rightfully so, right? The confidence and kind of this early masterful skill really in Burrow's it's his second year, but it's really his first full year because he had the devastating injury, the knee injury in his rookie year. The way he's able to come back, the confidence he shows, that attracts attention. Then, as you mentioned, Jamar Chase, you have T. Higgins, you have Tyler Boyd, you have Uzama, you have Joe Mixon. Like, you have all of these pieces in the offensive side of the ball. But you know what? This defense does not get enough credit of how they have revamped that side of the ball. You've seen the signing of Mike Hilton, the defensive back. You saw how that played out with Tennessee last week and the incredible interception he had. I've been saying it since the offseason. The move quietly that was one of the best of the offseason was Trey Hendrickson coming over from New Orleans over to Cincinnati. He's been an absolute disruptor. You've seen it in these playoffs. You've seen it all season long as he led them in sacks. You saw the domination at defensive tackle last week that B.J. Hill had in containing Derrick Henry. He's been absolutely fantastic. This defensive line for Cincinnati can rotate in and out. And even though they suffered a couple injuries in the Las Vegas game, they still have a lot of depth there and a lot of playmakers. And I love people like Bates in the secondary. These guys are hungry. Eli Apple has kind of, after his little bit of resurgence that he gained in New Orleans, he's still having great games and played a great season for the most part in Cincinnati. We're not asking him, if you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, to be a superstar, but be a really solid starter, be a solid role player in certain packages. And you saw the play that he made last week at the end of the game against, Westbrook Akina that leads, the ball pops up in the air, leads to the game-sealing interception. They drive a little bit down the field, and the Bengals kick the game-winning field goal. This defense does not get enough credit for the Bengals, and arguably, I think, Bri, you could say that this defense, you're definitely going to say Kansas City, even though it's close, they probably, given the experience and the production they've put up, they have the advantage offensively over the Bengals. I think by and far, this Bengals defense, the way they've been playing, they have the defensive edge over the Chiefs. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, especially with the way they performed this postseason. I mean, you hold the team in the playoffs to 16 points last week like they did against Tennessee. That's getting it done. And the other area where I don't know if they have an edge, but at least they excel special teams wise in the kicking game with the rookie kicker that you know well from your University of Florida. Yeah, your team. And we saw him go 4 for 4 in that Tennessee game. He's proven now that he can be a big money kicker. So that's big in the playoffs. You can't be leaving points out there, and I don't think Cincinnati will. The other thing I think that's interesting to look at is these teams played. It's not like they played back in week 2. It was pretty recent when they met in Cincinnati, and the Bengals won that game and had their offense
about a month
really
ago.
Impressive. Yeah, I'm sure you remember Jamar Chase. It was probably his best game of the season as he went over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, he basically won me my championship.
As I think he did a lot of people. And Joe Burrow had a 2-game stretch there where he was just playing out of his mind, and that was one of the games. So he kind of knows what to expect from this Chiefs defense. I don't think Chase is going to shred them like that. I mean, if he has a game like that, I think you'd say it's a pretty good chance Cincinnati pulls off the upset. But I'm expecting a pretty close game overall.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, ultimately, it's very simple. It doesn't come down to these quarterbacks. It doesn't come down to these playmakers. The matchup I'm watching, it's this Bengals offensive line that got absolutely shredded even in the win last week. 9 sacks that they gave up against Tennessee. And not one of those situations where you could go, hey, well, let's look at the 9 sacks where most of them the QB's fault because he was holding the ball too long. I mean, there was just some plays, even when Burrow wasn't getting sacked, that we talked about last show. He was getting hit on plays that were blown dead. He was getting hit on successful pass plays, everything. He was getting hit, for God's sakes, when he was handing the ball off. He was still getting tagged at the end of it. This offensive line, you have to watch that matchup versus the Chiefs defensive line, because you could say, outside, I would say, of Tyrann Mathieu, all their playmakers and big money players on the defensive side of the ball for KC, they're on the defensive line. Your Frank Clarks, your Melvin Ingram that they got in midseason, your Chris Joneses. Those guys should overwhelmingly have the advantage against this Bengals front 5. And if they don't take over the game, if they allow Joe Burrow to pick apart that secondary of KC, which can be susceptible. I mean, they're saying Tyrann Mathieu is probably going to play this week. He's been a full participant in practice. He's still in concussion protocol, but the arrow's pointed up for Sunday. But even outside of him, this secondary can be had for KC, and if this front seven and that front four particularly does not get pressure on Joe Burrow, it's going to be a long day for Kansas City, no matter if they have Patrick Mahomes or anybody else on that side of the ball.
Yeah, no question. And, I think it's always fun to take a look at a couple X factors when you look at big games like this. And I've got one on each side of the ball. I'm curious to see what your picks are if you have one for X factors. But on the Chiefs side of things, I'm going to go with the running back Jerick McKinnon because this guy's become a pretty big part of the offense. I think unexpectedly, lately the Chiefs have been kind of shuffling running backs in and out. They've had some injuries. Edwards-Helaire's been in and out. Darrell Williams, who's done a great job filling in, but he hasn't been healthy this playoffs. And so McKinnon, who, remember, started his career in Minnesota, looked like he was a pretty big factor there, signed a pretty big free agent deal with San Francisco, but was just never healthy. And so now here he is getting an opportunity with Kansas City, and he's a good fit in that offense. They swing him the ball out and passes. He can run it a little bit. So I like what he's been able to do, and I think he plays a role in this game. And then for Cincinnati, of course you're going to talk about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and all those pass catchers. This one, I think you brought up his name, and I think he's a good sneaky little play, is the tight end C.J. Uzomah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in big games like this, it's not necessarily the big stars who make the big plays. Like all of a sudden, they'll be in the red zone, and suddenly it's a guy like C.J. Uzomah catching a key touchdown pass, and he's been a factor in the red zone for them. So I could see him making a big catch or two, and those are two guys I'm looking out for.
Yeah, I think those are great picks. For me, on the Cincinnati side of it, I'm going to linebacker Logan Wilson. I mean, you've seen what he did last week with that game-sealing interception. You've seen what he's had, I believe, 20 tackles so far in this playoffs. He had a great season. He's been an active player in the middle of that defense. And for me, if he's watching a McKinnon in the backfield, if he's watching Mahomes to scramble, if he's covering some of those underneath routes against Kelsey, that's an X factor, a guy that I'm really looking forward to on Cincinnati and seeing how he goes in the matchups against this KC offense. So there's all this firepower. And then I say for KC, I say it's one obvious one, but you need it, and one X factor on the offensive side of the ball. We'll start on the defensive side of the ball. I already mentioned his name. Chris Jones has to have a huge game. This guy, the money they paid him, the caliber of player he's right up there, I'd say, in the top 3 defensive tackles in pro football. He needs to make his presence felt, very much so the way Jeffrey Simmons did last week for the Titans. He has to have that kind of game, even if he's not putting up 3 sacks. He needs to be getting constant pressure up the middle of Joe Burrow. So he's thinking about it when he goes to step up in the pocket. So he's thinking about it when he goes to check to a run play of a Joe Mixon who maybe want to run up the A-gap. That guy needs to be extremely active. And then on the other side, you have to imagine, even though it is very difficult, and we've seen with the statistically number 1 defense last week in Buffalo could not stop this KC offense. I mean, neither defense could, but, Buffalo's D was supposed to be number 1. They got to have to do something for Hill and Kelsey, right? Well, then, to me, it comes down to a player like McCole Hartman. I mean, that guy, we've seen him make several plays last week. We've seen him make plays last AFC Championship after he had the fumble early against the Bills, and then we came back and we've seen on the jet sweeps that he was making and the catches that he was that he was making as well. He's been a factor even before in special teams. He's got to be the X factor in case those other 2 star players get locked down. So those are kind of my X factors and the matchups that I'm looking forward to going into this game.
Yeah, I like the call on Hardman. I figured that you would pick a couple of defensive players with your love of defense, so not unexpected there. And I would watch too. Byron Pringle is another guy that Mahomes seems to trust a lot in key spots. So for the Chiefs too, I'm interested to see, can they get the big plays on offense? I'm not just talking about yardage. We're not seeing Mahomes throw the ball deep downfield.
Nah, he can't.
A lot during. Yeah, and I guess it's the offensive line. The protection hasn't been as good, but Tyreek Hill is catching a lot of shorter passes. Now, some of them he turns into huge gains because of his speed, but where are the 40 and 50-yard bombs down the field. That was so much the signature of this Chiefs offense. And to me, without those kind of plays, they're not at the level that we've seen them the last couple of years.
Yeah, Brian, it's simply for me, they and I think many people have talked about this, they've been taken away. I mean, those 40, 50-yard bombs have been gone. I mean, we've seen this dating back to, I mean, this is an old broken record that you've probably heard as a listener out there on TV many, many times, is Tampa kind of gave the blueprint last Super Bowl of how to defend against those deep shots, against those explosive plays. You know, explosive plays are considered, 20 yards or more, right? That's what the NFL considers them. And that's exactly what Tampa did. They did kind of a deep cover 2, cover shell as they call it. And they're just taking away those areas where they're putting those 2 safeties deep back, and they're saying no matter how fast Hardman is or how fast Hill is, you're not going to be able to beat us deep over the top, because we'll have the corner end up rotating with the safety, and then we'll have double coverage on whoever you're going to bomb it out to. So kind of on the fly in that offensive room between Mahomes and obviously Andy Reid, who is calling plays, and Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator, they've had to change this offense. And I've actually been pretty impressed that, okay, yeah. Are they to the level, to the ceiling that they once were at the moment? No. But the way that Mahomes has been able to check the ball down, to take the kind of the intermediate routes and not force himself, not get bored enough during a game, believe it or not, to go deep and to try something at the potential of having a turnover, I actually have liked his maturity and his progression. And you know what? Sometimes a death by 1,000 cuts can be just as painful as, as it can actually be more painful than just one, shot to fatal area, to the head, to the chest or something like that. And even though that part of it has been taken away by most defenses, I still think this offense is incredibly dangerous.
Oh, no question. And I think that's something we talked about the last time, too, how they have adjusted their offense mid-season. And talking about the last Super Bowl with Tampa, who came away with the blueprint. The other game that sticks out for a team that really defended them well, the Bills in that regular season matchup. That game, the Chiefs' offense, that was really where you started to sound the alarm bells, where it's like, what's going on with this team? And that kind of started them in a long stretch where they did not play well offensively. Now, the Bills were really not able to duplicate that, as the game last time we know turned out to be a shootout. But you're right, there have been teams that have shown a way to stop those big plays, which had been unstoppable. I mean, they were just killing teams with those big plays. They're just not there anymore, but they've been able to adjust and have success anyway.
Yeah, I think that the key in that regular season Buffalo matchup is Buffalo had 4 turnovers, that they turned Casey over 4 times. They didn't have any in this last game, and that is going to be the key, as it always is in any of these games, especially in playoff football. I think the Bengals have the personnel to be able to turn over. Even one turnover could be the deciding factor in a game like this. And I think they have the personnel. I think they have the ability in the secondary to play those coverages with Bates, with a Hilton, with all those players, and kind of contain. Because remember, guys like Hill, guys like Kelsey, I mean, Bri, you know as well as most people out there, you're not going to stop these guys. It's just about containing them, that they don't go off and completely annihilate you and knock you out of the game. I mean, you're not going to, hold a guy like Hill on most days to, one catch for 7 yards, or very much kind of like what Diggs had last week, where he was very bracketed in coverage and he was kind of a non-factor, but that led to Gabriel Davis having the game of his life when Diggs only had 3 catches, 7 yards last week. So you're not going to contain guys like that, but you need to just keep it underneath, take time away, make them earn every yard. And I think this Bengals defense is very capable of doing that.
I think it's time to make the pick. The way you're leaning, I'm wondering if you're going with Cincinnati in an upset. What's your pick here?
It kind of sounds like that, but for me, I think experience matters in this case. I think at home, in the crowd, in the cold matters. And would it completely shock me if the Bengals win? No, but I got to ride with the favorite. I got to be boring. I'm taking the Kansas City Chiefs in this one. I think it's set up for them to kind of have another Super Bowl run, a 3rd straight here, a 4th straight AFC Championship, obviously, that they are in. And I just think the Bengals, particularly in that offensive line, but in a lot of those other pieces, they're too young. They haven't been here before. This is way, way different than a regular season matchup where they played at home about a month ago. This is a different environment. This is playoff football. And now that we've seen KC, in these couple games, especially last week, because obviously the Steelers game wasn't much of a challenge, but They are battle tested. They know how to make the plays. They're going to be relatively healthy for this time of the season. I think great X factor that you call that. McKinnon has kind of been a lifesaver for this offense and all the things that he could do. And with all that being kind of meshed together, I'm taking the Chiefs.
Yeah, I'm going the same way as you are here. Look, Cincinnati's been a really good story, whether it's Cinderella or not. I mean, they're here in the AFC title game. They're deserving of this spot, but I can't pick them to go into Arrowhead Stadium with the way the Chiefs are playing right now, especially after coming away with that win last week. It just would be hard to see the Chiefs falling after a game like that. Really seems like they're playing their best football of the season. Seems like you mentioned battle tested. I think they've gotten stronger by going through that difficult period to see that maybe humbled them a little bit to see, how they could change the offense and still figure out a way to be successful and to come away with that and to beat up on the Steelers where they put up 5 touchdowns in a blink after a slow start and then came back and won the crazy game last week. I just think they're going to be too much to handle in their building. Give Cincinnati a ton of credit. I think, like I said, they're going to put up points in this game. I think they're going to keep this close for a while and might be close right to the end. I might pick Cincinnati plus the points. I think it's a touchdown advantage right now for Kansas City in the spread. So I probably would take Cincinnati to cover that, but give me the Chiefs at home to get to a third straight Super Bowl here with Mahomes and Andy Reid.
Yeah, I think your point there is almost as you would say the Chiefs kind of had their own crucible, right? Is what you would say that they had adversity and they've come out stronger now with that adversity on the other side. Bri, let's go to the other game, the other conference championship taking place at 6:30 Eastern time on Sunday. It's the San Francisco 49ers. Very much in their own way, maybe not a Cinderella story per se, because I think we've talked about all season that this team was underperforming because they have incredible talent. But the lowest seed, as the 6th seed left in the playoffs, a team that has gone on the road twice and has knocked off 2 division winners, including Green Bay, who was the number 1 seed. A team, remember, who were playing the Los Angeles Rams over here, the number 4 seed, that if they didn't choke away the last game of the season, the 49ers are not even in the playoffs right now. Never mind a conference championship game. They're sitting at home watching all these other teams, and the playoffs would be forever different. Who knows if you even think about kind of the spiderweb effect, if you may. Does Sean Payton possibly stay as the coach of the New Orleans Saints because the Saints would have therefore made the playoffs, and then who knows what would have happened? I mean, there's so many things to think about on that perspective. But regardless, the reality here and now is the Niners are going once again, as they did 3 weeks ago, back to Los Angeles to play their hated division rival. These two teams despise each other, and yet the Niners are the ones that have the last laugh. They've won 6 straight regular season games against the Los Angeles Rams. The last time the Rams won was the last week of the season against the Niners of the 2018 season. Interestingly enough, though, Bri, before I get your take, the year that the Rams went to the Super Bowl. So, fascinating there. Bri, what is your preview? What are you looking forward to in this game? And what are kind of the X factors, the matchups that you're looking at going into this one?
Yeah, well, I know you've been all over how your team has come up short against the 49ers. That's been well documented, and so this is probably the last team that you want to see in this spot.
Yes,
even
it is.
though right now you have to love the way the Rams are playing, but the thing is to me the advantage at quarterback is so significant in this game. I mean, with the way Jimmy Garoppolo is playing, he is just not playing very good football. I mean, we talked about the last game against Green Bay where it seemed like he could have had 4 or 5 passes intercepted.
Yeah.
It just is not. And then let's not forget in the Dallas game, he almost gave that away with an interception late and didn't play well. So the way Stafford is playing, I just think it is a huge edge. Remember the game the last week of the season, the Rams looked like they were going to cruise up with a big lead, and somehow the game got away. It seemed like there were some fluky things that went down. So I just really like the edge that the Rams have at quarterback and the way the offense is playing. I will say this, though. You have 2 clear number one receivers on both sides here, and I kind of think this is going to be a game where each defense keys in on that receiver. Like I think Kupp is going to get a lot of double coverage. They're
He
not going to let
should.
him go off. Yeah. And like the Bucks did, where he somehow had so many open looks on the
183
touchdown.
yards somehow.
Yeah. So I can't expect that kind of game from Kupp. I just think it reaches a point. I mean, the guy's beaten you time after time, and he beat the 49ers pretty well in both games, including the last one. So I just think the 49ers are going to make somebody else beat them. And for the Rams, they can't let Deebo Samuel wreck the game because we know he's capable of that too. And we know they have another game breaker at tight end in George Kittle. So a lot of really interesting matchups. Of course, the Rams cannot afford to turn the ball over the way they did against the Bucks. They're just not going to survive that, and the inexperience of Cam Akers. I think they might need to mix in some other running backs. You mentioned Sonny Michel, so I don't think they can rely fully on Akers, especially after he let him down in the last game. So, I mean, obviously, it's a really interesting matchup when you got divisional opponents going at it and the hated rivalry, the fact that Kyle Shanahan has always had the upper hand against McVay. I mean, I'm not going to make my pick yet. I think you probably know where I'm going. I've been on your team all season this year, but the last thing I'll say about the 49ers, this run so far is kind of reminding me of like one of the Giants' past
Very
runs,
much,
right?
yeah.
Where
Mm-hmm.
they get counted out, they play all these games on the road, you don't think they're going to win any of them, and they just keep
Also,
finding a way somehow.
that Packers 2010 wild card round too, very reminiscent of that.
Exactly, and they won twice there. First time against Favre on a game-winning field goal, and then beat Rodgers the year they were 15-1. So I see some similarities, and Garoppolo's not as good as Eli, but I think are some similarities in his game. So that's what they're kind of reminding me of, which means they're very dangerous, which and everybody knows. I don't think people are underestimating the 49ers. I just think the physical talent, the advantage, who has the better players, I think the answer is the Rams.
Yeah, see, I disagree with that, Bri. I think that the Rams have the better players overall as a team, but I think a lot of people out there are sipping this Rams Kool-Aid again. And you know what? You could do that in almost every game, but for some reason, when this team, no matter who's on it, your Von Millers, your Odell Beckhams, whoever the hell that they add every season, they cannot beat the San Francisco 49ers. And even when they do, it is extremely, extremely difficult. There's just something about Kyle Shanahan, the way he game plans against McVay, about when Garoppolo starts. I think he's something like 5-0 against the Rams. The Rams have never beaten him before when he started in Kyle Shanahan's offense. As I mentioned, obviously, at the top of this preview, they've won now 6 in a row, which if you look at the math there, clearly they also won a game as well without Garoppolo. I believe that was, I got to look that up, but I forget who it was. I think it was CJ Beathard, I'm pretty sure, won a game in that run there, but I'll look that up in a second. You mentioned also Kupp. Of course they're going to have to double cover this guy. He kind of ate and did whatever he wanted in the 2 games against the Niners this season. I believe it was, 18 receptions, 240 yards, and a touchdown. So he pretty much did whatever he wanted, as he's done against pretty much every single team in the league this year, even into the playoffs. The first receiver, regular season and playoffs included, to have over 2,000 yards in a season. That belongs to Cooper Kupp. He's kind of an unstoppable player. So then, if he's being bracketed, it's going to come down to these other guys, right? It's going to come down to your Van Jeffersons, your Odell Beckhams, obviously, your Tyler Higbees. These guys are going to be able to make enough plays. And, you look at it and go, they overwhelmingly, the Rams, have the QB talent advantage, right? But for some reason, it's just one of those weird things in the machine of football. When Garoppolo plays the Niners, the guy looks like goddamn Tom Brady. I mean, he's just unstoppable sometimes when he plays the Rams. And for some reason, no matter who the D coordinator is for the Los Angeles Rams, they do not know how to cover George Kittle and Deebo Samuel. It's the 2-star players. It's the most talented players. The ball is going to them. And over, they keep running the same slant routes right over the middle. We know how proficient Garoppolo is with passing, particularly over the middle of the field, not so much on the outside of the numbers. And they eat them alive every single time. And as a Rams fan, if you didn't know, listener out there, I'm a Rams fan. As a Rams fan, I'm incredibly nervous. I've been on this for 2 years now, Bri, that we've been doing this podcast. I've picked the San Francisco 49ers, I think, 3 out of 4, if not 4 times. And even when you disagreed with me, I unfortunately ended up being right, because it just sometimes in football, a certain team has your number. And before to go back to you for a second to talk about some X factors, you got to remember just 3 weeks ago, this Week 18 game, you got to remember the Rams are up 17-0. It's a chance to not only secure the number 2 seed and to guarantee no matter what happens in the Cardinals-Seahawks game, where the Cardinals ended up losing, which kind of gave the Rams a backdoor way to win the NFC West. They could have by and far won the game. They win the division. They clinch the 2 seed, and they knock their hated and most dangerous rival out of the playoffs. And they choke a 17-0 lead. Matt Stafford leads a drive back in the final 2 minutes. Should have been another game-winning drive that should have been added to his resume. And the defense gives up in less than a minute a touchdown right down the field. Lets the Niners and Garoppolo walk down the field. Team ultimately ends up losing in overtime. After a couple big plays, they settle for a field goal. Stafford throws a pick that he kind of underthrows or miscommunicates with Odell, and that was that. And the rest has been history up until this point. You have to wonder if that's in the Rams' head. They choked away a lead. It was the first time McVay had ever led at halftime, 17-3 at halftime, and they lost the game. And eventually, Bri, when you have a team that constantly finds different ways to beat you, low-scoring games, offensive shootouts, defensive games, that wears on a team psychologically, and I'm definitely worried about that going into this game. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely understandable. I mean, this 49er team was kind of an up and down year, but I like the way it's been built by the general manager, John Lynch. He's really done a terrific job. It's a team that really frustrates the opposition. That's what they do. I don't think they're necessarily the most talented team out there, but they just kind of have a way of getting under your skin. And obviously the Rams have been the victims of that just about more than anybody else. But to go to a couple X factors, I have my picks here. For the Rams, I would go with one of the pass catchers outside of Kupp. That's kind of the way I was leaning. Odell Beckham's too big of a name to call an X factor. Higbee, I feel like, has become a bigger part of the offense the last few games. Yeah. So I'm going to go with Van Jefferson.
Okay.
Because I think he's a guy where occasionally can catch a deep ball, kind of filling the Deshaun Jackson role. They had him early in the season, and he made a couple big plays, and then that was kind of cast aside. But he's a player who can get down the field and can stretch the defense. So I think in a game like this, he can be a difference maker. And like I said, I just don't think Kupp's certainly going to get his. You're never going to shut him down. He could have 10 catches and it feel like a down game. It's just the kind of year it's been for him. I just don't think he's going to have the monster numbers like we've seen so many games this year. So I'm going to go with a guy like Jefferson. Then for the 49ers, this one may surprise you. This is a veteran player. It's been around a long time. A former Super Bowl winner with the Baltimore Ravens, and that's the fullback, Kyle Juszczyk. This guy just seems to have a knack for big moments. He's a Harvard product. There's not a lot of Harvard players out there. Ryan Fitzpatrick is one, but Juszczyk, he can do a lot of different things. He's a versatile player. He can get you a short yardage carry, but he really does more damage as a pass catcher. And, there aren't many fullbacks that you can throw the ball downfield to, but he can be dangerous, running a wheel route and catching a ball in space. And so I think, he hasn't necessarily had that big of an impact this season, but I just think in a game like this, suddenly you look up and you could see Juszczyk making a big play. So I'm going to go with him on the San Francisco side. I'm sure you're going to take more of a look at the defense because that's your specialty, but let's see.
No, you'd be correct on that. For me, the X factor, and it's not much of an X factor if you've been watching these playoffs because the guy has been a monster. On the defensive side of the ball for the Niners, it's Eric Armstead. I mean, this guy has been arguably the best defensive player so far in these playoffs. I mean, he is wrecking shop. If you have not watched a Niners game, if you have not watched what this guy can do, even when he is not getting sacks and he's just getting pressures, it's incredible. I mean, he has to be someone that the Rams, he has 3 sacks coming into it just in the postseason here. Several tackles for loss, an immense, ridiculous high rate of pressures that he has had so far against, Prescott and then Rodgers respectively. He's someone that the Rams, who have kind of a smaller, more finesse, especially interior offensive line, and Eric Armstead, the D tackle, this guy you're going to have to run away from. You're going to have to be pulling guards. You're going to have to be double teaming. There has to be specific game plan that Sean McVay is getting to defend against this guy particularly and get him off his spot and off his game, because you give this guy a little bit of confidence during this game, you give this guy a little bit, a crack, a seam of light where he's going to be able to disrupt the play, and you give him that confidence, this game's going to be over very, very fast. So he's definitely an X factor for the 49ers. And then on the defensive side of the ball, on the other side with the Rams, he's been a former, Super Bowl MVP, but I'm looking at Von Miller. I mean, what the Niners are going to do. The great offensive line that they have. You have the questions right now. You have to watch on the injury kind of report right now. Is their all-pro, maybe best left tackle in the game, Trent Williams, he missed practice again today on Thursday. He's limited with an ankle injury. He's not playing. Kyle Shanahan seems to be getting a little more concerned day by day, even though he said he's going to play. You could kind of see in a little bit of the body language, they're wondering if he is going to play. And I'm sure you saw in Green Bay how unfair it was to have a guy like Trent Williams on the field, running. They're running him on powers, and they're pulling him as a sixth offensive lineman, which is just completely unfair. I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying that should, jokingly saying that should be outlawed just because of what that can do. If he can't play, or if he is limited, or his ankle is banged up, they're going to double team, Aaron Donald or your Greg Gaines or any of these guys. People like Von Miller, and even on the other side, Leonard Floyd, these guys are getting paid. They've been brought here. They have to eat. They have to get home, contain Garoppolo. He's not big. He's not a big runner. The defensive tackles and Gaines and Donald that are not going to allow him to step up as much. They need to be there playing sound run defense, sound gap coverage, and they need to be getting pressure on them. So for me, it's Von Miller on that side. And then on the other side, it's Eric Armstead. Those are going to be the two people disrupting it on each side of the ball, I believe, for these teams.
Well, no surprise they're going with defense. All right, I think it's time to get your pick. Now, I have a feeling I know which way you're leaning, which is against your team, but what is it?
Yeah, you'd be correct. I'm going to take that. Unfortunately, I hope I'm dead wrong. I'm going to take the San Francisco 49ers. For me, it really comes down to, until you can prove to me as a Rams fan and as a football fan, until the Rams can prove to me that they can beat this team, especially you have to remember, the lights are the brightest right now. I mean, a lot of these guys, particularly Matthew Stafford, have never been in this spot. When the lights are brightest, are they going to gag it away? Are they going to be able to control that Niners run game? And I think, we touched on it a little bit, but I think it needs to be outright said. Is Deebo Samuel kind of not the best all-around player in the entirety of football? I mean, I think so. Do you?
He's certainly up there. I mean, the year that he's had, and the fact now that they use him as a running back in addition to a receiver, it just seems like there's nothing he can't do. He can throw the ball, too.
He can throw it. He can block, too. He's an incredible blocker at the wide receiver running back position. So, to me, until the Rams can prove that they could stand up to the pressure of the brightest lights, they can prove that they could win a game at home, particularly against this team. A last point I want to say before I get your pick. Remember in the Week 18 game, there was a lot of trash talk that took place during the game, and there was a lot of trash talk that took place in the press conferences, particularly from people like George Kittle, who were saying that Rams players were saying that their season's over, we're getting the body bag for the 49ers, and then those Niners were not only took that to heart, and they showed the Rams when they beat them, they said they hope to see this team again this season. Well, both these teams, particularly the Niners, got their wish. So there's a lot of bad blood here. So until the Rams can prove that they can make enough plays, I'm unfortunately taking the 49ers.
Yeah, I get the idea. George Kittle, not one of your favorite players, but nevertheless, when I was thinking about
I respect his
my
game.
picks, when I was making my picks for week 18, I can't tell you how close I was to picking the 49ers because I just kept thinking Pete would tell me to pick the 49ers, and I really was about to, but then I was like, I've been on the Rams all year. I'm sticking with the Rams, and the way the game started, and they're up 17-0, I'm like, oh, it looks like I'm finally going to be right. And of course, we know what happened as that game got away. I don't know. I just feel like third time's the charm here. I'm going to
Or
go with that.
seventh time.
Oh, yeah, I guess in that regard, yes. I mean, this season it would be the third. But, like I said, the leading point for me is just the edge at quarterback. And I know Stafford hasn't been in this spot for in his career, but I just feel like he's ready for the moment. He's playing the best football now of his season. And the game last week, even with all the turnovers, as we talked about, none of them really his fault, and he just had a great game. And so for them to overcome almost giving that game away and to still pull it out, I just don't see them laying down here and losing. I just think, this is a team that's been all in. It's been Super Bowl or bust. I know they have their flaws. It hasn't always been pretty this year. Stafford hasn't always been pretty, but I just think the Rams have it together enough that they will get the job done and get themselves to a Super Bowl. I think it's going to be a tough game. I think it's going to be close, but I think Stafford makes a big play late with a touchdown pass, and the Rams find a way to win by a touchdown, something like 27-20. I'm going to go with the Rams to get to the Super Bowl.
I think if the Rams win this game, I think it's going to be a tighter game. It's going to be a field goal game. This is going to be a close one. It's going to come down to, as always, even like the last game, it's going to come down to field goals. It's going to come down to turnovers, and I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. The Rams turn the ball over 4 times and have 4 fumbles like they did last week. This game's going to be a blowout. This is not the team. This is not the rivalry that you do this against. They're going to have some ball security. They're going to have to somehow get some semblance of running. And hey, either way, I'm really looking forward to it. And I hope we can end the Niners season and continue ours. But I have my doubts. Also, before we move on, it was Nick Mullins last season when Garoppolo was out that won that game as well. So just speaks to McVay just not so far being able to get the best of Kyle Shanahan. Brian, before we go tonight, I want to talk a little bit about some of the coaching news and GM news that's been going on in the NFL since we kind of missed a lot of the firings. The last time that we really talked about this stuff was a few weeks ago, so I'll just update some viewers. I'm sure you're aware of it, but I'll just tell them anyway. We have currently, I believe, about 7 head coach openings. There was 9. So remember, the firings we had going on, we have the unsure situation, the midseason firing or stepping down of John Gruden. The Las Vegas situation is in flux. Vic Fangio of the Broncos, he was let go. So that left open a position there previously. Then you have Jacksonville, all the stuff we documented about Urban Meyer and that disastrous season that ended up happening. That spot is still open. The Texans ended up firing David Culley. I thought that team competed for what the talent that they had, all the controversy around Deshaun Watson that they've had this season. I thought that was a little bit of an unfair firing. I was not surprised just because it felt like he was more of a stopgap hire since he was hired so late in the process last year. Very unfortunate for him. I thought he did as well as he could. The shocking one, as we'll talk about, I thought was Brian Flores getting fired in Miami. I thought that the way that team started off and then turned it around with an 8-game winning streak, that left a vacancy that's going over there. To no surprise, I think, given that how they ended the season, and I think we could just sum up the end of the season with QB sneaking it on 2nd and 3rd down with the Giants. It was no real surprise how that ended up falling apart, that they ended up letting go of Joe Judge, and then they, Gettleman at the GM spot retired, quote unquote, even though they were kind of trying to oust him, pushed him out. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then in the NFC North, which is what kind of Rodgers has feasted on of just kind of poor QB play and team play, the Vikings, we talked about this early last season and in the offseason that we said Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, the GM, were on the hot seat. They both were let go after the disappointing season that the Vikings had. The Bears also on the hot seat, as we talked about, let go of Matt Nagy and the GM Ryan Pace. So those positions were both left vacant as well. And then kind of the surprising one that these rumors and rumblings started about a few days ago before it was announced was Sean Payton stepped down after 16 years as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints after just missing the playoffs, a little bit of a disappointing season, but nothing to be surprised about after a Hall of Fame QB retires. Jameis Winston is the heir incumbent. He goes out with a devastating knee injury, and then you're kind of fluxing with your Ian Books of the world that left over in a spot. Since then, as of today, on Thursday, we've had some GM hires that we'll talk about in a second, but the two big head coaching hires, Nathaniel Hackett, the OC, who did not call plays previously for the Green Bay Packers. He got hired as the head coach of the Denver Broncos. I want to get your thoughts on that in a second. And then Matt Eberflus, rumored the last couple years as a head coaching kind of hot ticket person, the DC for the Indianapolis Colts. He was brought in as the new head football coach of the Chicago Bears. So, Bri, I want to get first your thoughts on Nathaniel Hackett being the head coach of the Denver Broncos. Do you like the hire? What are your general thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a case. Both of the coaches that were hired that you just mentioned to me kind of fall under a similar umbrella in that it's a lot of unknown. That this is how a lot of hires happen, where a guy has success as a coordinator, all of a sudden gets a lot of interest as a head coach. Some of those guys end up turning out to be great head coaches. One that comes to mind is like Sean McDermott, right? He was the defensive coordinator for Carolina, got elevated to head coach. It's turned out to be a great success. But, there's others that have been complete flops. So it seems like there have been more flops than great success stories. I would say I like the Hackett hire more than Eberflus because, the league now is just so much geared more to offense. And obviously the Broncos have to figure out their quarterback situation. That has been what's been in flux since Peyton Manning left town. And that's really been the reason why they haven't been able to win, the Drew Locks of the world. It started with Teddy Bridgewater this year. They just haven't had a consistent quarterback, and you can't win in this league without that. So, Nathaniel Hackett has had success in different stops. He's kind of bounced around. He was in Buffalo. He was in Jacksonville, most recently in Green Bay. So his name has been kind of hot lately. But do I think the Broncos are going to turn it around? Not until they get a quarterback. So to me, that's what it's more about with that situation in Denver. With Chicago, we know they have the young quarterback, and it's a matter of developing him. And so then the question becomes, who does Eberflus bring in as the offensive coordinator? I think that's really the big key more than anything. But the Bears,
Absolutely.
Let's face it, have just been dysfunctional lately. The Trubisky draft pick set the franchise back, I think, 5 years. It's not like they were in great straits before then, but they just, Jay Cutler feels like the last decent quarterback that they had.
Yeah, that's saying something.
Yeah, because, we know Cutler certainly wasn't without his faults, but at least they were able to get to the playoffs with him. Lately, it's just been kind of a circus with Chicago. I know they've gotten to the playoffs a couple times, but I just don't see Eberflus being able to turn it around there. I was kind of surprised with that hire. It didn't seem like he was getting a lot of attention in other head coaching spots. So if I were to pick one that I'd be a little more optimistic about, it would be Hackett in Denver.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you there. Let's be honest about this, Bri. There's some reports out there, but I also think, anyone like us around NFL news and with eyes can kind of read the tea leaves, as they say. I feel like this Nathaniel Hackett hire, they like it. They think he probably gave a good interview, right? It was really down to kind of him and Dan Quinn, because Dan Quinn got a second interview as well. It seems like Dan Quinn is kind of being, hired everywhere, but we'll talk more about that. Of all the interviews he's done and what that means for his future. But the Nathaniel Hackett hire, I feel like, Brian, I want to get your thoughts on this. This is kind of done a little bit to kind of lure Aaron Rodgers to Denver, is it not? It kind of feels like that, right? He gives that glowing praise of Nathaniel Hackett not even just a week ago. I believe it was right after the game, and then he was talking about it more on that extensive interview amongst a lot of other eye-rolling things on the Pat McAfee show. It feels like he has a great relationship with Nathaniel Hackett. He spoke very glowingly of him. He said that this man commands a presence. He commands a room. He was surprised it took so long for him to be a head coach. He obviously comes from some football lineage in Paul Hackett many, 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 many years ago. That took place, I believe, for the Dallas Cowboys. It kind of feels like they're trying to, if that window opens with Rodgers and the Packers front office, that's where it kind of seems to be leaning, that there's some familiarity on the staff. I mean, do you feel that way?
Yeah, I didn't make that connection. I really didn't give that any thought, but when you say that, it really makes some sense. And I'll tell you, if you're the Broncos and you want to make a splash, that's exactly how you would do it. And, we saw the success that they had bringing in Payton in the later stages of his career, and he was great for them. The last year wasn't so great. But
Yeah, he still got to the Super Bowl.
He still got, that's the thing. He got to the Super Bowl. His performance fell off a cliff, but those first 3 years, he looked like prime Peyton Manning. And I think it's an organization with John Elway running the show. He wants the big shot quarterback. And so if there's a team out there that would go out and make a move for Rodgers, boy, it would make sense that it would be a team like Denver that's just been searching for that quarterback. And Rodgers has proven, even at his advanced age, he still has a lot left in the tank. And I've said before that I would find it hard to picture him in another uniform, but maybe, just maybe, that would work out and could really work out well.
Yeah, I think we had those same thoughts when Brady was looking like he was leaving New England. He ultimately did. Is like, can we picture this guy, Tom Brady, in another uniform? We said those things about Peyton Manning almost a decade ago now. So it's not inevitable, right? Like, it seems like a lot of these QBs are not like a Roethlisberger that we just saw today, and we'll talk about that in a second, where they stay with a franchise that drafted them the entirety of their career. It usually means at the end of it, they kind of move on to someone else. I feel like that's where this Hackett hire is kind of leading, even though it is by and far no guarantee, regardless of all the other drama stuff and all that we could talk about through the offseason, as we will when we have some of those shows with Aaron Rodgers. He's still probably going to win the MVP in about a week or so when the awards are on, about a week and a half. He's going to win a second consecutive MVP. It's going to be his fourth. He's still an incredibly amazing QB, and to have a chance, if you can improve your chances even slightly by hiring someone that he really likes and kind of vibes with, you imagine Nathaniel Hackett would be calling plays as the head coach there as well. I think it's a shot you have to take, and now with, Elway kind of, transitioning into more of an advisory presidential role, and Patton there as the GM in Denver, they had to have some conversation. They had to about, hey, we like this guy, and I think if we don't get Rodgers, he's going to be a great football coach, but it can't hurt, right? Like, that had to be talked about in the room. And, Bri, can you imagine, even just for a second, because I know we have some other stuff to talk about, if Aaron Rodgers went to Denver, would he not be insane? I mean, we're talking about Derek Carr, who's a really good QB, with all the dysfunction, just got the Las Vegas Raiders to the playoffs, would be the worst QB in that division. It'd be Carr, Rodgers, Herbert, Mahomes. It would be a gauntlet. It would be insane.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And the other thing that I was just thinking too is like the offensive playmakers. Denver is not bereft of talent on the offensive side of the ball with the likes of Cortland Sutton. You could just see him being an absolute star with Rodgers throwing him the ball. Noah Fant at tight end, I think, would
Jerry Jeudy.
Jerry Jeudy. Like, they've got some real
They got Tim
talent.
Patrick,
But a guy
too.
like Rodgers, pulling the trigger, that becomes a scary offense potentially.
Yeah, so that's an interesting hire. And then the other one that I mentioned that had happened that we talked about a little bit, the Matt Eberflus one, my thoughts on that. I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Ryan Poles was the GM. He got hired. He's kind of from the Kansas City office. Interesting. There's a lot of ties there. Matt Nagy, obviously, ties to the Chiefs, was on the offensive staff of Andy Reid. He gets fired, and now another KC person gets brought into the front office. So obviously there's some kind of withstanding relationship between the Bears and the Chiefs, or the Bears just think they can replicate some kind of Chiefs magic over there in Chicago. It's one of these cases, Bri, where it seems like a lot of these teams, they keep flip-flopping with coaching hires, right? Like they just were offensive with Matt Nagy. Okay, well now we have to go defense. Well, as you said,
Yeah.
and as a lot of people have said, this league is overwhelmingly geared to offense now. And I feel like when you have a young QB who got annihilated in his rookie year in Justin Fields, hiring a defensive coordinator, it feels very Chicago Bears, but I don't think it's the right decision. And that's nothing against Matt Eberflus. I mean, those Colt defenses had their moments. They were ranked inside the top 15 when he was kind of calling plays there in Indianapolis under Frank Reich. But it just feels like they needed an offensive splash. They needed a creative mind. And as you said, it's going to all come down to what they do at the offensive coordinator spot, because ultimately you have to get that offensive line right, and you got to get that QB in Justin Fields' mind right. You spent time to move up. He's the potential, probably the best potential hope that you've had of a franchise QB maybe since the 50s, right? Of an actual guy that can take you to that next level, to that stratosphere, particularly if an Aaron Rodgers left your division. And there is some nice offensive pieces that I do like for the Bears, and it just seems that they kind of went back to their roots, that 85 style of defense, when that defense is nowhere currently constructed near any of these. Even it's not even near the 2005 Bears. I'm just not in love with it. It feels like a very, I don't want to say lame duck, but it feels like just a very kind of hire,
Yeah, I think so, 100%. When I saw it, I just had that kind of reaction. It didn't excite me. I just don't think as a Bears fan, you see that and you become really energized by the hire. And if anything, that's what they needed to do with that. And to me, and clearly to you as well, that they came up short.
Yeah, and I think, very much as you touched on, the Sean McDermott hire that happened in Buffalo. Well, look at who the OC is, Brian Daboll, who's up for a lot of head coaching spots. You could get someone of that caliber running the offensive side of the ball, then I'm okay with Matt Eberflus being the head coach. It all comes down to that. Leading and transitioning into that just real quick, because I thought I'm wondering what the hell is going on down in Carolina. The Carolina Panthers, a few days ago, they hired Ben McAdoo as their offensive coordinator. Ben McAdoo. Remember, former head coach of that disastrous couple seasons he had with the Giants, and we've seen how that worked out. After they fired Joe Brady midseason, replaced him with Jeff Nixon, he obviously didn't come back after, the whole QB room there is kind of very meandering, and there's nothing of spectacular going on in Carolina. And I'm starting to question, Bri, and I think a lot of Panther fans I've seen on Twitter. I have a couple friends that are Panther fans. One of them even listens to the show. I got to wonder, are we starting to question some of the stuff that Matt Rule is doing down there in Carolina? Because I certainly am after I thought this was an eyebrow-raising hire.
Yeah, the Panthers have been kind of perplexing, I think, for a while. And, the quarterback situation, you touched on it. I didn't like any part of the Cam Newton reunion. I just didn't think it made
was
a
a
lot
good
of sense.
feel-good story, but not on the field.
Yeah, and, it's unfortunate that we thought Sam Darnold maybe had turned a corner with the way he was playing in the first few games of the season, but that just completely fell off a cliff.
Oh, my God.
And I mean, I just don't know what's going on with that team. Christian McCaffrey has had his issues staying on the field. Obviously, if they have any hope of success, he has to be healthy. There's just no other way around it. And yeah, I mean, Matt Rule, it came in kind of confident. It was around the same time as Joe Judge. Remember, the Giants were considering Matt Rule as the head coach, and he took the Carolina job first. They're just one of those teams that to me is kind of in flux. When your quarterback situation's in flux, your team as a whole is. And Carolina, it feels like so long ago that they started the year 3-0, and we're talking, could this team actually be a playoff team? But it just did not happen. I mean, quarterback issues and, bereft of any real talent on defense. It seems that since Luke Kuechly retired, they just don't have a whole lot of firepower there. So Yeah, it is perplexing that Ben McAdoo would be the guy, like you said, we saw as the head coach. And I remember his first year, he did actually get to the Giants and to the playoffs, which is hard to believe.
Yeah,
But
well,
they
we
had
remember
spent,
how that went. That's the boat game. That's what we remember
yeah,
that as.
exactly. And then obviously the wheels went off the track in the years that followed with the whole situation with Eli, and he just was not cut out for a head coaching job. So maybe better as an offensive coordinator.
Maybe.
Remember, he's another guy Rodgers knows well, worked with him in Green Bay. So I mean, you can't be overly optimistic about it. And as a Carolina fan, yet you just have to wonder, where is your team at right now?
Yeah, I certainly would. I mean, it's that division, Bry, is quickly becoming the worst in football. Now with Sean Payton exiting New Orleans, I mean,
Yeah.
you want to talk about a cakewalk that Brady's going to have if he comes back, which I believe he will. It's going to be a joke even more so next year. What is going on there? Just because while I like Arthur Smith in Atlanta, they just don't have the pieces to keep up. They just don't. Um, Before we round out for the night, we had a couple more hires. We'll talk about more in the next coming weeks. Front office personnel from the Cleveland Browns. We'll talk about that. That is the new Vikings GM. There was also a front office person, assistant GM from the Bills. That is the Giants' new GM. We'll talk about that in later shows. The other open spots that we could quickly kind of go through here that haven't been hired, right? You look at the Texans. The Texans is an interesting one, Bry, because you look at the people that they've interviewed so far. Okay, Brian Flores, really solid, right? You know there's some relationship, interest mutually between him and Deshaun Watson. Could possibly, I even said this week, Deshaun Watson, if all that legal stuff first and foremost gets solved, could he swallow his own words and actually play for the Houston Texans again if Brian Flores is hired as the coach? Because apparently that was a big reason that the Miami kind of stuff was kicking up was all because of Brian Flores. So that's an interesting thing to watch. But then the other interviews that they've had, some of them don't really jump off the page crazy to you, and then some of them are just fascinating, right? Like you have Jonathan Gannon, he's the Eagles D coordinator. That doesn't really jump off the page for me. I didn't look at the Eagles defense and go, wow, this team is spectacular. And then, Joe Lombardi, Chargers offensive coordinator there. I questioned some kind of play calling and stuff like that down the stretch. Also with Brandon Staley as well as the head coach in terms of time management that led to the Chargers being knocked out of the playoffs and losing to substandard teams, including this Houston Texans team. So I'm like, okay, doesn't really go crazy. But then Josh McCown and Hines Ward, I mean, those guys, listen, there's possibilities that any of these guys could just be a dynamite hire, right? We see that all the time. A guy comes out of the woods, you don't expect him to be anything, he ends up being a goddamn stud. But I got a lot of questions there, Bri, of those guys with very limited to no coaching experience whatsoever. Obviously, Hines Ward he's kind of on the coaching staff as he's a special assistant at Florida Atlantic University. I got to question some of the choice making there for Nick Caserio in the front office of the Texans. I mean, are you?
Yeah, it's a team that, we've talked about being one of, if not the most dysfunctional in the league. And, before you get to some of the guys that they've interviewed, I have to question the whole situation with David Culley because it's like,
Yeah.
why did you hire this guy? I mean, he's an older guy, finally got his first chance as a head coach with a rebuilding team, a team that had no expectations whatsoever. And, they weren't good, obviously, but like you said, they were competitive. They had some games where they played pretty well. I don't think he was that bad where you say one
No.
year and you cut the cord. So to me, I just think like, why did you hire a guy who's in his 60s, probably close to 70 years old? You were just gonna fire him after 1 year. I just didn't think that
And
made
remember, they hired
much
him
sense.
very, very late in the head coaching cycle, too.
Right. And the quarterbacks that they had out there, was like Davis Mills of the world and Tyrod Taylor. It was not exactly a spectacular
I see a
group.
little bit of hope in Davis Mill if they got him the right offensive coordinator. There's a little bit of hope there.
He had some good. The one game against New England stands out where they
Yeah.
almost beat the Patriots at home.
Yeah.
But as far as the guys they're looking at, Josh McCown is kind of intriguing because he's long been thought of as a future head coach.
Yeah.
He has that kind of mind. He's a guy who wasn't a star player, bounced around, journeyman. We saw him with the Jets actually do really well for a year. And so I see that kind of guy being a successful head coach. But like you, I would like to see some sort of experience. Let him be on a staff for a year or two, kind
Yeah.
of learn the ropes, not thrust right into a head coaching
In
position
a
where if he
dysfunctional
fails.
organization.
Right, and an organization like that, where say the first year they go, 3-14 or whatever, and then maybe they give them one more year and they don't really improve, and then boom, you kick them at the door. You don't want that kind of situation. But when he goes to a team like Houston, if that's what it ends up being, I just feel like that's what's going to be his fate.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's a team that is vastly, really due to Bill O'Brien, devoid of talent, devoid of draft capital. It's just not a great situation there. Do I have a little bit of hope if Brian Flores could come in and change the culture very much he did in Miami? Sure, particularly if you could keep Deshaun Watson there, if that legal situation gets sorted out. But I don't know. And they've also interviewed so far the least candidates about any of these open positions in the NFL. That's another interesting eyebrow-raising thing. Something to keep a watch on to see if they're kind of one of the last teams to hire a coach yet again. In Jacksonville, it seems like Brian Leftwich could get news as of soon as tomorrow. Seems like he is going to be the Bucs offensive coordinator. He is going to be the head football coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. There was a whole power struggle that took place today and a lot of reports that came out. We were talking about it just before we kind of went live with the show. He seemed to not want GM Trent Baalke in there. That kind of seemed to be an ultimatum that he was giving. And then we've seen the Jags, I guess, really wanting Brian Leftwich because they completely fired Trent Baalke today and replaced him with another GM. So it seems inevitable that that's going to be announced. What are kind of your thoughts there on Jacksonville? And is any of the situation with Trevor Lawrence, any of those offensive pieces, is anything intriguing to you about that job?
I think if you get the right guy in place that can get the most out of Trevor Lawrence, I mean, look, we know there's talent there. There's a reason he's taken number one in the draft and the college career that he had at Clemson. But the rookie year, it was a struggle, to say the least. I mean, it was not pretty. It led some to believe that maybe he's not a future franchise quarterback. I mean, like I said, I think there's a lot of talent there. Clearly, they got to build up the roster, get better just about everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of holes there. Leftwich is interesting. We know he quarterbacked them back in the day in
Mm-hmm.
Jacksonville, so there is a connection there. But yeah, very interesting that a team would go to that drastic of measures to, clear out a incumbent general manager. So, you don't see something like
You
that.
do not.
That just goes to show, we talked about the Texans. The Jags are another team that kind of falls like that, where the dysfunction kind of turns a lot of people off.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think, there's a long way to go regardless of who goes in there, but whoever is in charge, number one on the board is getting Trevor Lawrence improved, getting him playmakers,
Mm-hmm.
and getting him to be potentially a franchise quarterback down the road.
Yeah, we know what he was up against this season, particularly with Urban Meyer there, which we both had our doubts coming into the season about what he could accomplish. But I think neither of us expected it to go as bad as quickly as it did. But Trevor Lawrence did not look good. You need to get that situation right. He's a generational talent. You have to fix that. And Brian Leftwich, while he's calling the plays in Tampa, there's been reports there that it's very much Brady and Arians' offense, and you question how much of an input in the game plan does Leftwich have each week. Well, now you would assume he'd be calling plays over there in Jacksonville. The Jags had to really love him to make the pieces they had. They brought in Adrian Wilson from the Cardinals front office as their new GM that they announced today. So that's going to be a fascinating situation to see how that plays out. I'm looking forward to that introductory press conference that should be coming, I would imagine, as tomorrow, maybe early next week. The Las Vegas situation right now, Rich Bisaccia, I think you would probably agree, Bri, he should be commended, first ever interim head coach to ever lead a team to the playoffs. Everything that we have documented on the show that the Raiders dealt with this season, and to go down to the wire in the wild card game on the road against the Bengals, We know Derek Carr, Max Crosby, other Raider players have come out in support of Rich Bisaccia getting the job full time. It remains to be seen if that will be the case. They've had several interviews. We know they fired their GM Mike Mayock after 3 seasons as well, where he had some good picks later in the draft, but really what is going to be shown some of his free agent signings and moves with the Antonio Brown stuff, with the Arnett stuff, the Ruggs, they ended up kind of being misses in disastrous situations, which weren't all his fault. But he was let go there, so they're completing the GM process right now. We're going to look forward to see what's going to go on there. They've interviewed quite a few candidates there, and at the head coaching spot, not only Rich Bisaccia, but Todd Bowles has been brought in there. They've requested an interview for him. They've requested an interview for Gerard Mayo, the inside linebacker, former player for the Patriots, and Josh McDaniels has also been requested but not interviewed yet. So not a lot of movement in Las Vegas, but if Rich Bisaccia does get this job, are you okay with that? Would you rather him get the job? I mean, where do you land on the Las Vegas Raiders?
Yeah, I mean, look, the way he handled the situation, it obviously was a very difficult one, and he handled it well. So I certainly, if they chose to bring him back, I wouldn't at all have a problem with it. I think he very much is deserving. If I had to say right now, I think the organization will look for somebody else. So whether that be Todd Bowles or any of the other names you mentioned, I think they're going to have a new face. Todd Bowles kind of intriguing. You know, I think he's going to get a second opportunity at some point.
Mm-hmm.
The first one obviously didn't go great with the Jets. The quarterback situation was always in flux, as we know, but he's a very good defensive mind. Maybe he's a guy who learned from his first opportunity and will be a lot better in his second. I think he's going to get it at some point. Maybe it's the Raiders, maybe it's somebody else, but he's one that would be intriguing for me.
Yeah, Todd Bowles is an interesting watch. I mean, let's be fair, and no shots trying to instill on you, Brian, but you know he did coach the Jets, right? I mean, there wasn't a lot of hope there with Fitzmagic and everything that he was kind of given. So it'd be interesting to see. I'd be game for him to be getting a second opportunity. I just really love what Rich Bisaccia did. I love the way his players talk about them. I love that little story of him writing personal thank you notes to all of the players after the game. And staying in the hotel and doing it. I just think he's someone that he really cares, and he just seems to have the right stuff there. So I would like to see him get that job full time, but we'll see. The Miami situation, Brian, if we go to that real quick, I mean, were you shocked that Brian Flores was fired? Because I was absolutely shocked.
Yeah, especially with the way the season unfolded. The team started off so poorly and rallied to have that kind of a winning streak to put them in a position where they could have made the playoffs, you know, down the stretch. Then they had the loss to Tennessee late in the year, and that kind of knocked them out. But they were right in the mix, right in the hunt. And, you know, to rally the team the way he did, you know, he's a guy that to me is a tough-minded head coach. And I really thought he was building something there. It just to make another reference outside another sport, it kind of reminded me of what happened with the Cardinals this year and Mike Schilt, the manager, who was fired.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the team had that crazy winning streak late in the season and, you know, got to the playoffs and they fired him after the year. Kind of reminds me what happened in Miami. Now, I know the Dolphins didn't make the playoffs, but I certainly felt Flores did enough to keep the job, and it just seemed like there was a power struggle there that he couldn't win. And so Miami, another team back in search mode for another head coach.
No, I think that's a great reference. And yeah, I think it all comes down to, as you said, there was a power struggle. There was reports there that he didn't really kind of see eye to eye with Tua. I mean, we've seen that in a lot of the awkward press, post-game conferences when those questions, especially when the Deshaun Watson rumors and stuff was heating up. He went through a few offensive coordinators that he ended up firing and interchanging. So it just seems that kind of maybe Miami was a little worn out on Flores, and they ended up showing him the door despite what had happened. They've interviewed a few people, including, you know, Rams assistant head coach Thomas Brown, but it seems like the finalists currently are down to 3 people. It's Mike McDaniel, the 49ers offensive coordinator. It's Kellen Moore, Cowboys offensive coordinator, and it's Brian Daboll, the Bills offensive coordinator. So we see very much that Miami is they are looking to hire an offensive side of the ball. They need to get the Tua situation right. They need to get more out of that first-round draft pick. Remember, a team that literally took Tua one pick before Justin Herbert. I will never stop saying that. They need to get that situation right, and it seems like they are going in the offensive direction. Minnesota, we talked about before the season that it looked like they were on the hot seat in terms of Spielman, the GM, and Zimmer, the head coach. They were both let go. And right now, they ended up hiring, the Browns vice president of football operations. They brought him into the GM spot. We'll talk more about that, like I said, in future shows. But the head coach spot right now, Dan Quinn's off the market for all these teams. He's staying in Dallas. Great job to keep at least one of their coordinators over there in Dallas. I think that was a big thing that they needed to do. Very much similar names here, Bri. Very offensive, very defensive. Bowles, Gannon, Kellen Moore, Raheem Morris, the Rams defensive coordinator, the Rams offensive coordinator, Kevin O'Connell, and DeMeco Ryans, the Niners defensive coordinator. So what's kind of your feelings? Are they going to go defense, offense? Who do you think is kind of the front runner here for the Minnesota job?
Yeah, they've gone defense for a long time. Mike Zimmer was in charge for quite a while. Before him, Leslie Frazier, we know, is a defensive mind. So it just seems like they kind of favor that side of the ball. Clearly, they had very good talent on offense. To me, the Vikings are a team that has not gotten the most out of their talent in recent years. And it's not just a knock on Mike Zimmer. I mean, we know the quarterback, Kirk Cousins, just hasn't come up big in big moments. That really has just been the knock on him. But, you look at that team top to bottom, they got a lot of talented players, and you say they should be a playoff team, yet they've had too many years where they've just been mediocre to below. And so I think the next guy who comes in needs to get the most out of this talent, because they're a team that should be in the playoffs and potential to do some damage. So I'm interested to see where they go.
No, I completely agree on that. And you know what? I just have this weird feeling that Raheem Morris, there's been a lot of talk and buzz that he's going to get another head coaching spot as well. They go defense, as you mentioned. I think that's a potential name to keep your eye on there. It seems like the Rams lose assistance every single time. I think Brian Flores, just quickly, is also, there's a lot of connection there to the New York Giants job as well.
Yeah, agree.
With the connections he has there with some of the front office personnel that were just hired out of the Buffalo Bills, and Joe Sheen, that were hired as the GM, though, there in New York. I think that is the situation to watch. And then the other one, Bri, before we wrap up the show here, is that the shocking, at least for the general public, maybe not for the Benson family down there, Sean Payton, after 16 years, he stepped away. He stepped away from the New Orleans Saints. What do you make of that? Do you think he's going to TV? Do you think he's retiring? Does he ever return to football? I mean, what were your general thoughts when you heard that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it completely blindsided, I think, everybody, when that came out. So it was a big surprise. There's not a lot of head coaches that I would make this statement, but I feel like, going into next season, a year without Sean Payton, it leaves something of a hole in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's just been a constant for so long and has had so much success starting New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina devastated the area. And I just think about his coaching run with the Saints and the match made in heaven that he was with Drew Brees. Like, those offenses were just incredible to watch. With his mind for offense and Brees' ability to execute, it just made that team so good for so long. I know they only had the one Super Bowl. Probably should have had more than that, but they had just a tremendous level of success. And so it's a big loss, for the NFL to lose a guy like Sean Payton. And as you mentioned, TV could come calling. The networks seem to think he might be the next big analyst. But as he pointed out, too, that he's not calling it retirement. He wouldn't rule out coaching again down the road. I think he's still young enough where another opportunity could arise, but that probably doesn't come as soon as this year. I think he probably wants to take some time away from the game, maybe steps into TV. But I mean, what can you say? Just an incredible run that he had with the Saints and with Drew Brees. One of my favorite coaches. I really enjoyed watching the Saints year in and year out. And, like you pointed out earlier, not much that you can say about this year. When you're shuffling quarterbacks left and right, Taysom Hill's not really your typical quarterback. You weren't going to win big with the team you had this year. So it clearly was not a case of him losing his coaching ability as it was that maybe, it just ran its course. You're in one place for so long, eventually the time comes, and so it came for him. But that's off on a great run.
Yeah, great run there. I think there's a couple points to be made that, there's a lot of reports out there, as I keep saying. I'm trying to always keep up on the most up-to-date information for you all out there. And, he just said he was burnt out. That's what it said, is like this last year, all this COVID stuff the last 2 years, it killed him. I think he saw what life was like, very much like Belichick did in New England last year, of you lose a Hall of Fame quarterback. How do you go forward? How do you move on? This team is extremely over the cap. They are very strapped in what is going on. Some of that, let's see, the Taysom Hill kind of contract has been Payton's fault. But you have the QB uncertainty. You had, Mike Thomas was out all year. Kamara was banged up. There was a lot of things. This team was destroyed with COVID for much of the season, which led to kind of the Ian Book start on Monday night. I mean, there was a lot of things that ended up happening. And I don't think you can understate or forget what he did for the city of New Orleans, from not only Hurricane Katrina, which was a gigantic deal, but everything that they dealt with. I mean, remember, this team was, for a long time, they were the Aints, right? Like that's what they were. Mm-hmm. Fans were wearing, paper bags over their head at most of these games. He brought them back. He brought them into relevance, the greatest relevance I would say the Saints probably ever had in their history, between him and Breeze, that magical connection. And he made them a top contender year in and year out. And I don't think there's not enough you can commend him about for the job. He could be a little brash. He could be a little prickly. He could be a little bit cocky, but he's definitely a great soundbite. I definitely think he's a great players coach that players want to play for. And I think in another couple of years, if he wants to come back and get a job, I think many teams will come lining up for Sean Payton. Inevitably, there's the questions out there with the Cowboys and his connection to Jerry Jones. I don't know if that would be a perfect fit. Given that situation, we could talk more about that in future shows. But you know what? Hopefully he steps away from the game. Maybe he does a little bit of part-time TV. He just got recently married. Maybe he wants to enjoy all of that stuff and really step away from the game. Just wonder now who's going to fill in that head coaching spot. Does Dennis Allen, the defensive coordinator, does he get a shot here in taking over? I think he's earned that in a lot of ways, and it's particularly what that defense could show. Just plug on the game tapes of what his defense has done against Tom Brady in the last couple of years. I think that's a possibility. We'll have to see who they kind of bring in and hire there, but a great run in New Orleans. Can't say enough about that guy, and just a fantastic coach. Definitely, you would also say you expected a little bit more out of that him and Breeze combination, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the one Super Bowl, but they consistently were in the playoffs. I mean, like we said, I probably could have seen another Super Bowl with that group. They certainly were good enough a couple of those years, and had some shortcomings in the playoffs, but always a dynamic duo, those two. Breeze with those playmakers. I'm someone, I know you like defense, I like offense.
Yeah.
And so watching Breeze slinging it all over the yard, throwing the deep ball, like those offenses in the Superdome, they were just something to watch.
It was something to watch, and especially I remember that night when he set the record for passing yards. I mean, it was something magical there, and I'm gonna miss a lot of that. I miss Breeze this year, and man, yeah. I'm gonna miss that connection, and even just building that rivalry now there against Tom Brady and the Bucs. It's gonna be sad not to have that anymore. Quick note, we're not going to talk about much here because we are long on this show. We've talked about it in past shows. We'll talk about it in future shows, but also officially Ben Roethlisberger retired after 18 seasons of the Steelers. No surprise. We talked about that. It seemed like all the tea leaves were there. He basically confirmed it during the season. But I just wanted to make that quick note that, he did retire today. He is done. going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. We could talk more about what the Steelers do going forward, but yeah, just wanted to make that point as well. But guys, that wraps up First and 10. If you stayed with us this long, we appreciate it. There was a lot to talk about, a lot to cover since we missed a whole bunch of shows in the last couple months. So thank you so much. If you were just here for the previews, they're in the beginning. There's timestamps down below, as there always is. You could click around, see what you want to talk about, see your favorite team. We would just love for you to just, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends if you'd be so kind. Talk to us in the comments below. We know there's a couple weekly viewers that are here. We greatly appreciate that. We see your comments. Bri, doing the show right before the conference championships. Looking forward to Sunday. Any other final thoughts before we go?
Yeah, I was just thinking this for my final thought, that my Super Bowl matchup of the Rams and the Chiefs would give us a rematch of that crazy game. Was it the 2018 season? A game that I'm sure you remember well, and anyone watching, because it was one of the most memorable games on a Monday night where there were points galore. I mean, defenses scored a bunch of touchdowns, but both teams were in the upper 40s. You probably remember the final score, but it was just one of the craziest regular season games I could ever remember. So think about that as a potential Super Bowl matchup. Wow, we would really be in for a treat.
Yeah, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was 51-48, if I remember.
Yeah.
54-51. It was an insane game.
Yep.
Incredible. Actually, it came down to defensive plays. Remember Samson Ebukam, who, funny enough, we're going to see him this weekend. He's a 49er now, making 2 gigantic plays in that game. And it's funny enough, in 2018, D4 doesn't step off sides. They beat the Patriots. They go to the Super Bowl, the Chiefs. And then, we know the controversial call that sent the Rams, in some ways you could argue, back and forth in the Saints game to the Super Bowl. So could we get that matchup? Possibly. We'll see. Probably Sunday night. Monday we'll be recording another show, guys. But thank you so much for listening. If you've been here so long, greatly appreciate it. We're wrapping up. We're almost at the end of the 2021 NFL season. Regardless of what team wins, we're 3 games away from the end of the season, which is really sad to think about here. But guys, we'll be with you through the offseason as well. There'll be a whole bunch of more head coaching and all that stuff to talk about. Talk to us down below. We will see you later this weekend when the conference championship games are over. And until next time, thanks for watching.